What if the legacy that made him immortal was the same legacy that brought America to its knees in quiet sorrow? Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes, the man whose voice could bend time and whose presence could command a room before he even spoke, left behind more than a fortune. He left behind a weight of memories that still echo decades after his final bow. The chairman of the board built an empire of music, film, friendships, and influence, with an estimated net worth of over $200 million when he passed. His home stretched from Palm Springs to Malibu, museums of a life lived in stardust and sharp suits, each room filled with photographs, gold records, and the scent of a vanished era. But beneath this empire of applause and glittering lights, there was something America felt but rarely understood, a silence that only grew louder as his star rose higher. It is within that silence that the real story begins, the part of his legacy that no stage ever fully revealed, the cost of becoming unforgettable. He did not enter the world in the glow of spotlight, but in the raw silence of Hoboken's cold winter air. Born in 1915 to Italian immigrant parents, Frank Sinatra came into life fighting for breath, his fragile body marked by scars that never fully disappeared. His mother worked long, relentless hours in a bustling neighborhood where noise was constant, but opportunity was scarce. His father, a quiet man with tired hands, boxed in smoky basements to keep the family afloat. Hunger, uncertainty, and the sharp smell of the docks shaped the boy who would one day command the world's largest stages. Frank grew up surrounded by clattering trains, tense arguments behind thin apartment walls, and the distant sound of jazz drifting from bars he was too young to enter. It was not luxury that raised him, but the echo of longing, longing for a life larger than the narrow streets that tried to keep him small. One night, while listening to Bing Crosby on the radio, something shifted. The boy with the bruised voice understood, with startling clarity, that sound could set him free, that music could carve a path where none existed. In that moment of quiet revelation, he made an unspoken vow. He would rise, he would escape, and he would make the world listen. And from that vow, a fire began to burn. Steady, determined, unbreakable. He did not rise suddenly. He rose like a storm-gathering force. Frank Sinatra began his ascent in small, smoke-filled clubs where the microphone crackled and the audience barely looked up from their drinks. But when he sang, something happened. The room stilled, conversations faded, and every wandering heartbeat seemed to anchor itself to his voice. That was the spark. The moment when the young man from Hoboken realized he could command silence with nothing more than breath and emotion. His first breakthrough came when he joined Harry James's orchestra, and almost overnight, his voice began turning heads. Then came the turning point. Tommy Dorsey. Under Dorsey's shadow, Frank sharpened his phrasing, learned the delicate art of holding a note until it melted, and transformed from a promising singer into a national phenomenon. By the early 1940s, crowds weren't just listening, they were screaming. Newspapers called it Sinatra Mania. Young women fainted at concerts. Radio programs begged for his presence. He was no longer a boy chasing dreams. He was the dream itself. Success built upon success. His film career took off with roles in From Here to Eternity, a performance that earned him an Academy Award and revived his career when critics claimed he was finished. Then came the albums, In the Wee Small Hours, Songs for Swingin' Lovers, Only the Lonely, each one carving deeper into the American cultural landscape. These were not just records, they were emotional blueprints for generations searching for meaning in love, loss, and longing. As his fame expanded, so did his empire. He bought lavish homes in Palm Springs and Beverly Hills, estates filled with glass, sunlight, and the quiet hum of success. He collected art, fine suits, rare recordings, and friendships that stretched from Hollywood royalty to political icons. His circle included presidents, film legends, and musicians who sought his approval like a benediction. He invested in casinos, entertainment ventures, and real estate that multiplied his fortune year after year. By midlife, he was no longer just an entertainer. He was a force, a brand, an empire built from grit and breath. Yet even at the height of triumph, something unspoken lingered. Behind the roaring crowds and polished tuxedos, He often sat alone after shows, nursing a drink in dim rooms where applause could not follow. He built everything he once vowed to create, but with every new success, the silence behind it grew heavier, deeper, more demanding. And in that silence, the price of brilliance began to reveal itself, quietly like a shadow approaching from the edge of the spotlight. He had everything, yet lost what mattered most. At the height of his fame, Frank Sinatra stood in a world most people could only imagine. Spotlighted stages, roaring crowds, tailored tuxedos, presidential friendships. But none of it could shield him from the storms that gathered quietly inside. The man who made America swoon was also a man who wrestled with loneliness so deep it echoed through the empty rooms of his grand estates. His marriage to Ava Gardner, the love story the world romanticized, fractured under the weight of passion, jealousy, and the relentless demands of fame. They burned too brightly, too fiercely, leaving behind ashes neither could gather again. When she left, a silence settled over him that no applause could break. He wandered through nights with a drink in hand, the soft glow of half-empty lamps casting long shadows across polished floors. Friends would later say they had never seen him so alive on stage, nor so lost when the curtain fell. His relationship with his children, strained by absences, touring schedules, and the emotional turbulence of his life, carried wounds that fame could not heal. He tried to be present, but the world constantly pulled him back into its orbit. Regret became a quiet companion, lingering in the spaces between his triumphs. There were moments when his career faltered, when critics declared him finished, when health issues crept in like unwelcome guests. The man who once dominated every room suddenly found himself standing alone in the dim corners of his own success, wondering how much of himself he had traded for immortality. The voice that had once soared with effortless brilliance now battled exhaustion, weariness, and time. He felt every year, every heartbreak, every sacrifice. Friends drifted away, lovers became memories, nights stretched longer, the rooms grew quieter, and his wealth, the homes, the art, the investments, could not lift the weight pressing against his chest. Money could rebuild walls, but it could not rebuild moments lost, hands not held, apologies never spoken. All the homes he built could not shelter him from the storms within. All the records he broke could not mend the cracks beneath the surface. And for a man loved by millions, the cruelest truth was that he often faced his battles alone. Yet within that quiet suffering, something profound was taking shape. The beginning of a legacy not measured in applause, but in endurance, in humanity, in the fragile beauty of a life lived boldly and imperfectly. When the lights finally dimmed and the curtain fell for the last time, what remained was not just the fortune he built, but the imprint he left on the soul of a nation. Frank Sinatra's estimated $200 million legacy was divided among his children, his wife Barbara, and the charitable causes he quietly supported for decades. But the true measure of his wealth could never be contained in bank accounts or property deeds. It lived in the way America breathed when his music played, in the way hearts softened at the first note of My Way, in the way a generation learned to love, mourn, and dream through the stories carried in his voice. His songs became emotional anchors through wars, heartbreaks, and the shifting decades of American life. He left behind not only albums and films, but an artistic blueprint of how vulnerability could exist inside strength. His philanthropic work, especially the Barbara Sinatra Children's Center, became a light for countless young lives searching for safety and guidance. These were his quiet bricks, the ones he laid without spotlight or applause. He didn't chase immortality. He built it quietly, one note at a time. From dusty clubs to global stages, from fragile beginnings to monumental fame, his journey became a testament to the endurance of hope. His children, Nancy, Frank Jr., and Tina, carried his music into the future, preserving not just the sound, but the courage embedded in it. And every singer who ever stepped to a microphone with trembling hands stood on the path he carved. What he left behind wasn't just wealth, it was a map of resilience for anyone who has ever risen from nothing, stumbled, fallen, loved too hard, or endured too much. His legacy whispers that, Greatness is not perfection, but persistence. If his story touched you, leave a small tribute in your heart, because legacies like his are kept alive not by monuments, but by memory. In the end, all that remained was the stillness. The same stillness that once filled the small rooms of his childhood, the backstage corridors of fading nights, and the quiet corners of his vast homes. It was in this silence that Frank Sinatra's legacy settled, not as an echo of applause, but as a soft, enduring presence that refused to fade. From the boy who listened to a distant radio in Hoboken to the man whose voice became America's heartbeat, his journey completed a perfect circle. His music continues to drift through late-night diners, old radios, the cracked speakers of vintage cars, carrying with it the warmth of a time that felt slower, gentler, more honest. And somewhere in that gentle hum, the world is reminded that greatness is often carved not from moments of triumph, but from the quiet resolve to rise after every fall. From silence he rose, and in silence he left behind a legacy that will never fade. A legacy America still carries softly, like a hand over the heart.